I'm an engineer by education, went to Cornell and Rensselaer, and an inventor by avocation. And for the last, 10 years or more, I've been lecturing and writing on World War II history and the history of technology, two subjects that interest me a lot. And some years ago, it must have been 15 years ago or so, there was a Shackleton exhibit that came to New York City for a short period of time with one of his rescue boats, the lifeboats, which you'll learn about a little bit later on today. And it was quite an amazing thing to me. It sort of started my thinking process about learning more about him. And at the end of my talk, I'll list some sources if you want to follow up yourself. There's quite a number of books in the Fairfax County Library and elsewhere, plus a bunch of films, including the original 1917 films by both Shackleton and his photographer, Frank Hurley, that you can get from. So today, since we're going to be talking about the Arctic, it tends to be cold. I didn't want to come in my mucklucks and my winter clothes, but this is going to be close enough. All right, how's that? Is that appropriate? Okay. So let us begin. We're going to talk about two things. First of all is misadventures in the Arctic itself, and secondly is opening up the Northwest Passage, which is sort of an allied topic. Well, let's take ourselves back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, 1895 to 1910, along in that area there. If you were a young man, there always were men, and you wanted to make a name for yourself as an explorer, there was a little bit of Africa that was unexplored at that time, but mostly it had to do with the poles, Arctic or Antarctic. And Antarctica was a long ways away, and certainly Shackleton was a good example of that. He did a great job in exploring the Antarctic, and one of the things he's most famous for, of course, is his survival down there. But on the other end of the pole, most of the explorers were European, a few Americans thrown in for good measure, and they clearly Arctic is a lot closer to Europe than Antarctica is, so it was easier to get to. Let me start off by saying that, as it says here, California is in trouble, and I want to tell you today a tale about the climate change, and human hubris, which are working together to create this crisis in California. Many years ago, more than 1,000 years ago, there was a bunch of Native Americans, the Anasazi and others, who tried to live in the American Southwest. It didn't go so well. Basically, their population increased to such a point that the available water, which wasn't much to start with, couldn't support it. And then they had a multi-year super drought, which kind of killed the golden horse, and basically either they all died or moved away. It's not known. California faces a very similar problem. Things have changed, however, and in modern technology there are ways to ameliorate the problem with very deep wells and pumps that will accommodate deep wells, bringing water in from many hundreds of miles away, taking water that comes from the snowpack down to the lower parts, the desert parts of California's Southwest. But there's a limit to that, and the limit is now being reached. And so what I want to do today is to give you some feeling about the scale, the depth of this problem, and if indeed what can be done about it, if anything. This is the second in the series of 4 talks concerning the sea. I call it Caribbeana because it's about the Caribbean. Last week we talked about the Panama Canal, that incredible construction project to create a shortcut so people wouldn't have to go, mariners, around Cape Horn, around the southern part of South America. Next week, the talk is going to be about some really crazy expeditions up to the Arctic. People who never should have gone there, but did anyhow. Some of them were successful, some of them were amazingly unsuccessful. But today we're going to talk about the rather surprising variation and variety in people, food, music, culture, history, and so on in the Caribbean basin. It ain't going to happen. Okay, Pop's garden. Pop was an elderly guy, and he loved to work in his garden. This is an example of creativity, which is what I'm telling you. So he liked to work in his garden, but he was
getting a little bit old, and he couldn't work in the garden anymore. The physical stress was too hard. And his son always helped him. But unfortunately, his son, Tommy, had a residence at the time that prevented him from coming to help Pop. And so he decided what he was going to do is to write a letter to his father. The letter said something like this: "Dear Pop, don't dig up the garden, that's where the bodies are buried." Well, realizing that any outgoing mail would be censored and read by the staff, the next day this army of people from the FBI and local police arrived at Pop's place with shovels, and they dug up the entire garden and then left. There weren't any bodies, but Tommy was a very creative person and got his father.
There really is a different way to do things. The towel. All right, this is one of my favorites. Not entirely, when I said not entirely serious, I did mean that. Now, this young lady was at home with her husband, and she just stepped out of the shower, put on her bathrobe, and her husband stepped into the shower, and just then the doorbell rang down front. So she puts on, he said, "Why don't you go answer the door?" She said, "Just got my bathrobe on." Go answer the door. So she puts on her little bunny slippers and she pads downstairs to the front door and looks through the peephole, and it's their next door neighbor, Joe. I said, "What does Joe want?" So she cautiously opens the door, and Joe's standing there. He takes a quick look at her, and this bright light comes on in his eyes, and he says, "I will give you $500 if you open up the commode and give me a quick look." Well, she's insulted, of course, by the thought about that. Then she thinks, well, my husband and I, we have some big bills. And $500, that would be all right. So, okay. He looks, his eyes brighten. He reaches into his wallet and pulls out 5 $100 bills. Hands them to her. She turns around, resigned expression on her face, goes back upstairs, and her husband, who's still in the shower, says, "Who was that at the door?" She said, "Oh, it was Joe, our neighbor." "Oh, did he say anything about the $500 he owes me?" Hopefully one thing will lead to another. So why should we talk about homeopathy at all? Well, it has a very interesting history, some of which I'll talk about. It's familiar to most people. They may not know much about it specifically, but at least they've heard the word. It does create lots of confusion because there are a lot of misunderstandings about it. And it does give us all the opportunity to educate ourselves about it. The puzzle of homeopathy. Generally speaking, by the modern medical community, every physician, you might say, most of them, discount it as being completely worthless. And they have reasons for that. And we'll get into that. Yet, on the other hand, in face of all of that negativity, it's survived for more than 150 years. The question is, why? And hopefully you'll understand some of that as well. The kind of things that you have in your medicine closet, these are not homeopathic remedies, the vitamins and minerals that you might take every day. And the reason is they're bioactive. They do something to you when you take it. The concentration of it is strong enough that it has some effect on your body. The same thing with ethical pharmaceuticals. The higher tone, higher strength kind of medications you might take for all kinds of medical conditions, they're not homeopathic either. And the main reason is they too are bioactive. They're strong enough to do something to you. Some terms that we'll talk about is allopathic. That refers to conventional medical practice, your doctors that you would go to. And as you'll see a little bit later, actually it's a negative term. It was coined by Samuel Hahnemann, who's the founder of homeopathy, and he meant it as a slam to the standard medical practice at the time. So this picture is really just a background picture. It doesn't really show any particular monster. And so, but it does hopefully induce you to be thinking about these things. Now here's a picture. It
consists of 953 frames of 16mm footage, known as the Patterson film. About 40 seconds of silent footage that has galvanized the world.
Do you feel galvanized? Again, here's one of the things to look at. Here's this picture. It's the 16mm films taken, I think, in the 1980s, as I recall. And what are some of the things that you can characterize about that particular picture that strike you right off, if you're interested at all in photography or such things? Anybody have a thought about that as to what characterizes that little short film clip that you saw?
Very shaky.
Shaky, very shaky, slightly out of focus. And I mean, it's really shaky. It kind of moves all around as if on purpose. And as it turns out, for those skeptics, there's a magazine called Skeptical Inquirer, which I subscribe to, which for people like me, skeptics, and an entirely appropriate name. As it turns out, that particular episode is a complete fake. And some years afterwards, the guys who perpetrated the fake admitted to it. The guy just had a monkey suit on, that's all, with some...
Yeah, because he walked like a man.
He walked like a man, exactly. And so then you also have to ask yourself, okay, here's this it's a single episode where this thing was captured on film. And so where's its mate? Where's the other people of that particular species? Where are the corpses? Where are some bones? Nothing ever appears. And probably nothing ever will appear. Very interesting device. This is a very clever device. Imagine, if you will, a tube, a snake, if you will, that's about 10 feet or so in diameter and 400 feet long. And it's segmented into three or four segments, like as you see here. 1, 2, 3, 4 segments. And as this baby rides the waves, like a snake, it flexes. And so you have these segments that flex like this as it rides the waves. And inside there are some hydraulic pistons. So each time it flexes, it drives some hydraulic fluid past a turbine to generate electricity, down and up, left and right. Very clever system, very ingenious. But the problem, one of the problems with it is that it works best when the waves are biggest. When the waves are biggest, the waves are the most powerful and the most destructive. So it's a very harsh environment for that baby to operate in. And they've had a test unit now up in Scotland for some years. It works like a champ. It's a smaller, it's not the full size, it's a smaller size, but it is working.